The message from beyond. When the signal arrived. The discovery happened on a Wednesday afternoon at the Atacama Deep Space Observatory in Chile. Dr. Marcus Cole had been monitoring deep space frequencies for 17 years without finding anything more interesting than cosmic background radiation. Then his screen lit up with patterns that made his coffee cup slip from his hand. The signal was impossible to ignore. It repeated every 47 seconds, mathematical sequences that proved intelligence behind the transmission. Marcus called his team immediately. Within 6 hours, every major space agency on Earth was analyzing the same data. Within 12 hours, the world knew humanity was not alone. The signal contained instructions. Not threats, not warnings, just simple directions for building a receiver capable of accepting a more complex transmission. The instructions were elegant, almost beautiful in their simplicity. Any civilization capable of spaceflight could follow them. It took humanity 3 weeks to build the device. The Galactic Ultimatum. When the receiver activated, the message that came through changed everything. A face appeared on screens worldwide, humanoid but distinctly alien. Its skin held a faint purple tint, and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern gazed out with cold certainty. This was Archon Vel, Supreme Coordinator of the Tarvan Collective. His message was brief and absolute. Humanity had been observed for 2 centuries. The collective had watched human technological development with growing concern. Humans had split the atom, escaped their gravity well, and begun colonizing their solar system. They had done all this while still engaging in tribal conflicts and resource wars. The collective had seen this pattern before. Species that reached the stars while still divided always became threats. They spread chaos, started conflicts, and disrupted the careful order the collective had maintained for 8,000 years. The solution was always the same: integration before corruption. Archon Vel presented humanity with a choice. Accept collective oversight and surrender all military capabilities, or face economic isolation and eventual forced compliance. The collective controlled access to 70% of known space. Trade routes, resource zones, and habitable systems all fell under their administration. Any species operating outside collective authority would find themselves trapped in their home system, cut off from expansion and slowly suffocating as resources depleted. The ultimatum gave Earth 1 standard year to decide. After that, collective enforcement fleets would arrive to ensure compliance one way or another. The transmission ended with coordinates for diplomatic contact and a reminder that resistance had never succeeded in collective history. The woman who would not bend. Sarah Chen watched the broadcast from her office at the Mars Colonial Authority. At 41 years old, she had spent half her life building humanity's first self-sustaining off-world settlement. She had fought budget cuts, equipment failures, and the harsh Martian environment. She had watched 17 colonists die despite her best efforts. She had also watched the colony grow from 12 frightened scientists to 3,000 thriving settlers. The collective's ultimatum felt like a slap across everything she had built. Surrender military capabilities meant no armed vessels, no defensive satellites, no way to protect the colonies humanity had bled to establish. Economic isolation meant no expansion, no new worlds, no future beyond what they already possessed. Sarah had grown up in Beijing during the water wars, when nations fought over rivers and aquifers. She remembered hiding in shelters while drones screamed overhead. She remembered her father explaining that bullies only understood strength, that surrender only invited more demands. The collective spoke with diplomatic words, but Sarah recognized the language of bullies. She sent a message to Earth that night. It reached General James Morrison at the United Defense Coalition headquarters in Geneva. Morrison was 63, a veteran of 3 wars and the architect of humanity's orbital defense grid. He read Sarah's message 3 times before responding. Her proposal was simple but dangerous. Humanity should refuse. Not with violence, not with threats, but with absolute defiance. They should continue expanding, continue building, continue growing as if the collective did not exist. Force the collective to make the first aggressive move. Make them choose between their peaceful reputation and their demand for control. Morrison knew the risks. The collective had technology centuries ahead of human capabilities. Their ships could cross light years in weeks while human vessels needed months. Their weapons could crack planets while human railguns barely scratched modern armor. A direct confrontation would be suicide. But Morrison also understood something the collective might have missed. Humanity had never been good at accepting change, even when the chains came wrapped in promises of prosperity and peace. The secret councils. What happened next occurred in classified facilities across Earth and the colonies. Morrison convened a meeting of military leaders, scientists, and colonial governors. They gathered physically in Geneva, in a room 40 meters underground, shielded from any possible surveillance. Sarah attended via quantum-encrypted connection from Mars. Joining her were Governor Takashi Yamamoto from the Europa Station, Commander Patricia Okonkwo from the Asteroid Belt Mining Consortium, and Dr. Rajesh Patel from the Luna Research Facility. Each controlled resources and people the collective did not know existed. The meeting lasted 14 hours. They debated, argued, and calculated. Some advocated acceptance, arguing that survival mattered more than pride. Others demanded resistance, insisting that a life in chains was no life at all. Sarah spoke for 2 hours, presenting data the collective had missed. Humanity was not contained to Earth and its immediate orbital space. Over the past 80 years, while focusing on Mars and the Moon publicly, humans had quietly spread throughout the solar system. There were hidden facilities in the asteroid belt, mining operations on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, research stations in the Kuiper belt. The collective surveillance had been good but not perfect. More importantly, humanity had been preparing. Not for the collective specifically, but for the general possibility of hostile contact. Every science fiction story, every first contact scenario humanity had imagined ended with either friendship or warfare. Humanity had hoped for friendship but planned for warfare. The orbital defense grid was more extensive than public records showed. Hidden shipyards orbited Saturn, producing vessels the collective had never detected. Weapon research had continued in facilities disguised as ice mining operations. Humanity had been paranoid, careful, and secretive. Now that paranoia might save them. The decision point. General Morrison presented the final assessment. If humanity accepted collective terms, they would survive but stagnate. The collective would control expansion, regulate technology, and ultimately determine humanity's future. Based on collective history with other species, full independence would take between 500 and 2,000 years. If humanity refused, they would face military confrontation within 12 to 18 months. The collective would send enforcement fleets to blockade Earth and the known colonies. Humanity would have to either surrender under worse terms or fight a war they would likely lose. But there was a third option. Sarah proposed it, and Morrison refined it. Humanity would refuse the ultimatum but avoid direct confrontation. They would continue expansion using hidden routes and concealed colonies. They would develop technology in secret facilities. They would make themselves too dispersed to control, too hidden to eliminate. The collective would face a choice: expend enormous resources hunting scattered human settlements across hundreds of systems, or accept humanity as an independent species and focus on more compliant members. It was a gamble based on human psychology applied to alien thinking. They had no guarantee it would work. The vote was not unanimous. 12 of the 47 council members argued for acceptance. But the majority chose defiance. They would refuse the collective and prepare for the consequences. Sarah Chen would lead the expansion effort, establishing hidden colonies in systems the collective had marked as uninhabitable or worthless. Morrison would command military preparation, developing weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter collective advantages. Dr. Patel would oversee technology development, focusing on areas where humanity might achieve breakthroughs the collective had overlooked. They had 1 year before the collective returned. 1 year to prepare for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity remained free or spent centuries in golden chains. As the council dispersed, Morrison approached Sarah's holographic image. She looked tired, the Martian gravity weighing on her after hours in the transmission chair. But her eyes held the same determination he had seen in young soldiers before impossible battles. The hidden expansion. Racing against time. The clock started the moment Earth sent its response to the collective. The message was diplomatic but firm. Humanity thanked the collective for their offer but declined integration. Earth proposed instead a mutual recognition treaty. Humanity would respect collective territory if the collective respected human sovereignty. The message included assurances of peaceful intent and offers of cultural exchange. Archon Vel's response arrived 3 weeks later. It was colder than his first message. The collective did not negotiate with unintegrated species. Humanity's refusal was noted and regretted. The enforcement deadline remained unchanged. In 11 months, collective fleets would arrive at Earth. Compliance would be ensured. Sarah Chen did not waste time on anger. She had 11 months to accomplish what normally required decades. Her team on Mars had already identified 17 star systems within range of human faster-than-light drives. These systems had been surveyed by collective probes and dismissed, too cold, too unstable, resources insufficient for profitable extraction. Perfect for human colonization. The first colony ship launched from the hidden Saturn shipyards 4 weeks after the decision. The vessel carried 300 volunteers, prefabricated habitat modules, and enough supplies for 5 years of independent operation. Its destination was a system collective charts labeled as Sector 771 Null, a red dwarf with 6 planets, none of which met collective habitability standards. The third planet, however, was exactly what humans needed. Gravity at 90% Earth normal, atmosphere requiring only basic filtering, temperature range survivable with insulation. The collective had deemed it worthless because the surface water was heavily mineralized and the soil required treatment before supporting collective agriculture. Humans had survived in worse conditions on Mars. Commander Patricia Okonkwo led that first expedition. At 37, she was young for such responsibility, but she had spent 12 years managing asteroid mining operations in conditions that killed the careless. She knew how to build infrastructure from raw materials. She knew how to keep people alive when everything tried to kill them. The colony ship, designated Prometheus, crossed 42 light-years in 6 weeks. The journey was rough. Human FTL drives were crude compared to collective technology, requiring more energy and producing more stress on passengers. 3 colonists suffered serious medical issues during transit. But Prometheus arrived, and within 48 hours, Patricia had her people establishing the first structures. They named the planet Defiance. The network spreads. While Patricia built on Defiance, 11 more colony ships launched from various hidden facilities. Each targeted systems the collective had ignored. Ice worlds with subsurface oceans. High-gravity planets rich in heavy metals. Tidally locked worlds with habitable twilight zones. Anywhere the collective saw wasteland, humans saw opportunity. Dr. Rajesh Patel coordinated the expansion from Luna. His facility maintained a constantly updated map of human space, encrypted and stored in isolated servers the collective could not access. Each new colony added to the network, each success proved humanity could thrive beyond Earth's protection. But the expansion was not without cost. The colony ship Icarus suffered drive failure halfway to its destination. Unable to complete the journey or return home, the crew made the agonizing decision to divert to the nearest collective way station and surrender themselves. 38 colonists chose possible imprisonment over certain death. Archon Vel broadcast their arrival as proof of human desperation. The colonists were treated well, given comfortable housing and food. They were also questioned extensively about human capabilities and plans. Most refused to answer. But the collective learned enough to understand that humanity's expansion was more organized than anticipated. The message was clear: the collective was watching. They were gathering intelligence. And they were not pleased. Weapons in the dark. General Morrison's challenges were different but equally urgent. Humanity needed weapons that could challenge collective superiority. Direct confrontation was impossible. Collective warships displaced 50,000 tons and carried energy weapons that could burn through any human armor. Human vessels were smaller, slower, and armed with kinetic weapons that seemed primitive by comparison. Morrison's team focused on asymmetric warfare. If they could not match collective power, they would avoid fighting on collective terms. The research facilities hidden in the Kuiper Belt became laboratories for unconventional weapons development. Dr. Elena Volkov led the weapons research program. She was 51, a physicist who had designed Earth's orbital defense satellites. She understood that innovation came from accepting limitations and working around them. Collective shields could stop energy weapons and deflect kinetic projectiles. But shields required energy, and energy systems created heat. Elena's team developed what they called thermal cascade torpedoes. The weapons carried no explosive warheads, no kinetic penetrators. Instead, they were designed to attach to enemy hulls and generate extreme localized heat, overwhelming the target's cooling systems. Once thermal management failed, the ship's own reactor would become a liability. The torpedoes were small, stealthy, and could be launched from concealed positions. In simulations, a single torpedo could disable a collective cruiser. The trick was getting close enough to attach them. Morrison also oversaw the construction of humanity's first dedicated warships. These vessels, built in the Saturn yards, were nothing like the exploration ships that had carried colonists to Mars and beyond. They were lean, fast, and designed for hit-and-run tactics. Each carried 12 thermal torpedoes, point defense railguns, and enough reactor capacity to outrun anything in the collective fleet. The first warship, designated Shadow Falcon, completed trials 7 months into the countdown. Commander David Zhang took her through acceleration tests that would have crushed untrained crews. The ship performed beautifully, reaching velocities no human vessel had achieved before. But beauty did not guarantee victory. Morrison needed 30 such ships to have any chance of meaningful resistance. He had resources to build 8 before the deadline. The collective moves. 8 months after humanity's refusal, collective activity increased dramatically. Survey ships appeared in human-claimed systems, scanning planets and orbital infrastructure. They did not attack, did not threaten, but their presence was clear intimidation. The collective also began diplomatic outreach to Earth's nations individually. Archon Vel offered special terms to countries willing to accept integration separately. Economic incentives, technology transfers, preferred status within the collective hierarchy. It was an attempt to fracture human unity, to create divisions that would make resistance impossible. Some nations wavered. The African Union debated accepting, arguing that collective technology could solve climate challenges and resource scarcity. The Pacific Alliance considered the economic advantages. But Morrison and Sarah had anticipated this. They had spent months building consensus, ensuring every nation understood that partial surrender meant total surrender eventually. Earth's governments held together. Barely. Then came the incident at Defiance. A collective survey ship entered the system and detected Patricia's colony. The survey ship, designated Observer 17, transmitted images of human habitats back to collective space. It catalogued the colony's population, infrastructure, and defensive capabilities. Patricia had her defensive satellites lock targeting solutions but held fire. Morrison's orders were explicit: do not initiate combat. Let the collective make the first aggressive move. So she watched Observer 17 conduct its survey, catalog her colony, and prepare to leave. But Observer 17 did not leave. Instead, it transmitted a message directly to the colony. The words were translated automatically by collective systems. Unregistered settlement detected in collective surveyed space. Colonial activity without authorization violates collective territorial agreements. Colonists will prepare for transportation to designated processing facilities. Resistance will result in protective intervention. The survey ship was claiming authority over Defiance despite never having established any presence in the system. It was attempting to arrest 300 human colonists for the crime of settling on a planet the collective had abandoned. Patricia faced her decision point. Surrender her people, or fire the first shot in a war humanity was not ready to fight. She chose neither. Instead, she transmitted a response that would become famous throughout human space. This is Commander Patricia Okonkwo of the human colony Defiance. Your claim of authority is not recognized. This system was unsettled and unclaimed when we arrived. We have established sovereign presence under human law. You are free to leave peacefully. If you attempt to board our facilities or transport our people, we will defend ourselves. Observer 17's response was immediate. The survey ship activated what the collective called protective intervention protocols. Weapons ports opened. Targeting sensors swept across the colony's defensive positions. Patricia gave one more order. Fire. Four defensive satellites launched kinetic penetrators simultaneously. The projectiles crossed the distance in seconds, striking Observer 17's hull before its shields could fully activate. The impacts did not destroy the ship, but they damaged its sensor array and propulsion systems. Observer 17 transmitted a distress signal, then retreated from the system at reduced speed. Patricia knew what that signal meant. She had just started the war 11 months early. The message reached Earth 6 hours later. Morrison read the report and immediately activated emergency protocols. All colony ships were diverted to their destinations at maximum speed. All warship construction was accelerated. Every human facility went to combat readiness. Sarah Chen received the news on Mars and felt something unexpected, relief. The waiting was over. The collective had made its move, and humanity had responded. Now everyone would see what humans did when pushed too far. Archon Vel's statement arrived the next day, broadcast across collective space and transmitted to Earth. His three eyes showed what might have been anger or might have been satisfaction. It was hard to tell with alien expressions. The species designated humanity has committed an act of violence against collective personnel engaged in lawful survey operations. This aggression confirms predictions regarding human instability and validates integration protocols. The enforcement deadline is rescinded. Collective peacekeeping forces will arrive at Earth and all identified human settlements within 30 standard days. Compliance will be ensured. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force as necessary to protect collective personnel and restore order. 30 days. Morrison had planned for 11 months and received 30 days. The military preparations were incomplete. The hidden colonies were not fully established. The weapon systems were still in testing. But humanity was committed now. There would be no negotiation, no last-minute compromise. The collective was coming, and humanity would face them with whatever they had ready. Morrison convened his command staff one final time before the storm arrived. They gathered in the same underground room where they had voted for defiance. The mood was different now. The theoretical had become concrete. People would die in the coming days. Colonies might be destroyed. Earth itself might face bombardment. General Morrison stood at the head of the table and looked at each face in turn. These were the people who would lead humanity's defense. Some were experienced military officers. Others were scientists and administrators thrust into war by circumstance. All of them were afraid. All of them were determined. 30 days, Morrison said simply. The collective thinks that's enough time to break us. They've spent 8,000 years making other species surrender. They don't understand that humanity has spent its entire history refusing to quit even when quitting made sense. He activated the holographic display, showing human space in its entirety. Earth and the established colonies glowed in blue. The hidden settlements showed in green. Collective approach vectors appeared in red, multiple fleet elements converging on human positions from different directions. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time," Morrison continued. "Everything about this situation says we should surrender. That's exactly why we're going to fight. Because if we don't stand up now, we never will. And I'd rather die free than live in chains, even golden ones." Sarah Chen's hologram nodded from Mars. Patricia's image, beamed from Defiance, showed fierce agreement. Dr. Patel, Dr. Volkov, Commander Zhang, all the people who had worked themselves to exhaustion preparing for this moment, they all understood. This was humanity's line in the sand. Not because they were sure they could win, but because surrender was not in their nature. The countdown had begun. In 30 days, the galaxy would learn what happened when you tried to cage humanity.